The heavy oak door of the Oakhaven mayor's office creaked open. I didn't look up, but I didn't have to. I recognized the scent of my father's cheap cologne, a scent I hadn't smelled in 10 years. For a decade, I was a ghost to them, the political pariah they'd publicly disowned after a bitter argument. Now they stood before my desk. My father, Richard, my brother, Caleb, and my sister, Maria. Their faces were a tight mask of desperation and distaste. They clutched a thick roll of blueprints, the key to their future. The very plans that required the one thing they swore they'd never need again. My signature, the signature of Mayor Elias Vance. The son they cast aside. I slowly lifted my gaze, letting it settle on each of them in turn. My father, Richard, stood ramrod straight, his jaw so tight I was surprised a molar didn't crack. The 10 years had carved deeper lines of resentment into his face, but the same stubborn, unyielding pride burned in his eyes. He was the architect of my exile. Beside him, my older brother Caleb shifted his weight. His glare was pure venom. He'd always been Dad's echo, his most loyal soldier in the family's Cold War against me. And Maria, my baby sister. She clutched the blueprints to her chest like a shield, her gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. Her silence, as always, was the loudest. 10 years, and not a single phone call. Not even when Mom passed. They hadn't even told me she was sick until after the funeral. I let the silence stretch, a heavy, suffocating blanket I had grown comfortable with. I watched them marinate in their own discomfort, the very thing they had forced upon me for a decade. Finally, I leaned back in my leather chair, the sound echoing in the tense room. "Well," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "to what do I owe the displeasure?" Richard's face flushed a dull, angry red I knew all too well. "Don't play games, Elias. You know exactly why we're here." He slapped the roll of blueprints onto my mahogany desk. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the quiet office. The Oakhaven Riverfront Development. The name sent a jolt through me, throwing me back 10 years. The memory wasn't hazy, it was a shard of glass, forever lodged in my heart. We were in the family dining room. The air, thick with the scent of my mother's pot roast, was even thicker with unspoken resentment. Mom, already looking frail, picked at her food, her eyes pleading for a peace she knew wouldn't come. I was 32, the vice president of Vance Contracting, and I'd just presented my case for the original riverfront bid. I'd spent weeks on it, a modern proposal with union labor, higher grade, sustainable materials, and green-certified construction. It was about building a legacy for Oakhaven, not just a structure for profit. My father saw it as heresy. Union wages? Environmental permits? He'd bellowed, slamming his fist on the antique dining table, making the silverware jump. That's not how we built this company. We built it on speed and thrift, not on the liberal garbage you learned at that university. We build shoddy, Dad. I shot back, my own voice rising to meet his. We cut corners. The bridge on Elm Street needed major repairs in 5 years. This is a chance to do it right, to build something that lasts, something this town can actually be proud of. He's right, Elias. Caleb sneered from across the table, dabbing his mouth with a napkin as if my words were something to be wiped away. You're spitting on everything Grandpa and Dad built. I looked desperately to Maria. She was my last hope, my baby sister. She just stared at her plate, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork, refusing to meet my eyes. Her silence was the deepest cut of all. My father stood then, his shadow falling over the entire table. His voice dropped to a low, menacing growl that I can still hear in my sleep. If you believe that tripe more than you believe in your own family, then you are no longer a part of it. You are no son of mine. Get out of my house. No one moved. No one spoke. Not Caleb. Not Maria. not my mother, who just closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. So I left. That night, I was jobless and familyless. I started Vance & Sons contracting with a second-hand pickup truck and a loan I barely secured. My first major project was a new community center, built to last, with union hands and the best materials. People noticed. My reputation grew on the very principles my father had spat on. And 2 years ago, those principles made me mayor of the town that had witnessed my exile. My focus snapped back to the room, to the 3 figures standing before me like ghosts. I looked from my father's defiant glare to Caleb's sneer, to Maria's downcast eyes. Then my gaze fell to the blueprints on my desk. I slowly unrolled them, my hands steady. "The riverfront development," I repeated, my voice a low murmur. "After all these years, it seems you've finally come around to my way of thinking." My words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just gestured impatiently at the plans. My eyes scanned the first page. Title block, Vance Contracting. My old family name, now a symbol of shoddy work and cheap bids. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I traced the architectural lines with my finger, my mind a cold, quick calculator. It took me less than a minute. I saw it all. The grade of rebar specified was the bare minimum required by code, not what you'd use for a structure meant to withstand a 50-year floodplain. The foundation specs were shallow, designed for speed, not longevity. The materials list was a love letter to the cheapest suppliers in the state. This wasn't an evolution of my idea, it was a desecration of it. They hadn't come around to my way of thinking at all. They'd just stolen the concept and stripped it for parts, leaving a hollow, profit-driven shell. The betrayal wasn't that they were here asking for my help. The betrayal was that after 10 years, they still hadn't learned a damn thing. I tapped a section of the plan detailing the river-facing retaining wall. "This won't work," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Caleb scoffed, crossing his arms. "And why's that, Mr. Mayor? Did you suddenly get an engineering degree along with that fancy chair?" I ignored him, my gaze locked on my father. "The aggregate specified for the concrete mix is substandard. It'll crack and spall within a decade, especially with the freeze-thaw cycles we get here." Richard's face darkened. "It meets the state code. Barely. Is still legally." "It may meet the state code," I countered, my voice hardening slightly, "but it doesn't meet Oakhaven's. Ordinance 11B, the riverfront durability mandate, passed it my first year in office. All new construction on the river must use materials certified for a 100-year lifespan." I leaned forward, my hands flat on my desk. "I wrote it specifically to prevent builders like you from putting our town's future at risk for a quick buck." The color drained from Richard's face. He knew. Of course he knew. He just gambled that I would be so desperate for a reconciliation that I'd look the other way. He gambled that the son he threw away would betray the principles that got him elected, just for a crumb of family acceptance. He gambled wrong. "You did that to spite us," Caleb hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "No, Caleb," I said, finally looking at him. My gaze was like ice. "I did it for Oakhaven. I did it for the people who trusted me. I did it so my mother's hometown wouldn't be littered with crumbling monuments to your greed." I saw Maria flinch at the mention of Mom. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the blueprints. For the first time she looked up, her eyes wide, glistening with something I couldn't decipher. Was it guilt? Fear? Or just the dawning horror that their entire plan was about to collapse? I picked up my pen, a heavy silver fountain pen the city council gave me. Not to sign, but to make a correction. I drew a thick, red X directly through the retaining wall specification, then another through the foundation plan, and another, until the heart of their project was bleeding red ink. I pushed the mutilated blueprints back across the polished mahogany. They slid to a stop right in front of my father. "Rejected," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Come back. when you have a plan that doesn't insult my intelligence or the ordinance I wrote to protect this town from you." The finality of my voice hung in the air, thick and absolute. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner, a stark contrast to the storm of fury gathering in my father's eyes. Caleb's hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides, his chest heaving as if he'd just run a marathon. He looked like a rabid dog on a very short leash, and my father held the end of it. But Richard didn't explode. He did something far more unnerving. With a terrifying, deliberate slowness, he reached out and placed his hands on the mutilated blueprints. His movements were precise, economical, like a surgeon preparing for a difficult operation. He carefully aligned the edges, his knuckles brushing against the wet red ink. He didn't flinch. Then he began to roll them up, the crisp paper whispering a protest against his controlled rage. The sound was deafening in the silence. Caleb took a sharp breath, about to unleash the torrent of venom I saw churning behind his teeth. "You son of a—" "Caleb," Richard said. The name was not shouted. It was a low, guttural command that sliced through the tension and stopped my brother cold. His jaw snapped shut with an audible click. Richard never took his eyes off the blueprints. He was rolling into a tight, perfect cylinder. My gaze flickered to Maria. She hadn't moved, but the shield she'd been holding was gone. Her arms were limp at her sides, the fight drained out of her. Her eyes, for the first time, were fixed directly on me, and in their depths, I saw the ghost of the sister I once knew, not with anger or fear, but with a flicker of dawning, horrified understanding. It was a look that said, "He's right, and we are wrong." It was the validation I had stopped waiting for 10 years ago, and its arrival now felt like a punch to the gut. Richard finished rolling the plans. He tapped the end of the cylinder on my desk twice, a sharp, percussive thump that felt like a gavel striking down a verdict. He straightened up, his posture once again ramrod straight, the architect of my exile, now the architect of this new, colder war. He looked at me, a faint, chilling smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't over, Elias," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "You may have the office, but you're still just a boy playing with rules. We built this town, and we can tear it down." He turned on his heel without another word. Caleb shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred before following. Maria hesitated for a fraction of a second, her gaze still locked on mine, before she turned and disappeared out the door, closing it softly behind her. I was left alone. The silence they left behind was heavier than the one they had walked into. My victory tasted like ash. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing me in with the ghosts of my family and the echoing silence of my father's threat. I stood, walking over to the large window that overlooked Oakhaven's town square. The victory didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like a diagnosis, a confirmation of a sickness in my family that had gone terminal. For a fleeting moment, I saw my mother's face reflected in the glass, her sad eyes pleading for a peace I could never give her. The ash in my mouth was the taste of her memory, tarnished by this war, one never wanted but could no longer escape. My father's words, "We can tear it down," weren't just the bitter rantings of a defeated man. It was a promise. He wouldn't fight me on the permits. He would try to burn down the office around me. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, my assistant, Sarah, stood in the doorway, her face pale. She held her tablet out to me like a piece of evidence. "Mayor Vance," she said, her voice hushed. "You need to see this." On the screen was the homepage of the Oakhaven Chronicle. The headline was a gut punch. "Mayor Vance uses office to settle family score." Below it was a picture of my father, looking solemn and wronged, standing in front of the Vance contracting headquarters. The article was a masterpiece of manipulation. Richard was quoted extensively, painting me as a vindictive son, drunk on a little bit of power. He claimed Ordinance 11B was a poison pill piece of legislation, rushed into law with the sole purpose of blocking his family's legitimate business interests. He spoke of my liberal agenda and anti-business regulations, strangling the town my grandfather helped build. He didn't mention the substandard concrete or the shallow foundations. He just sold a story of a family spat, and he'd made me the villain. The comment section was already a bonfire. Old friends, neighbors, people who'd voted for me were turning. Asterisk, I knew he was petty. This is a family issue, shouldn't be city business. Let the man build. My father wasn't just tearing it down. He was turning my own town against me, one citizen at a time. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was his turf. He knew how to play this game, the court of public opinion, where facts were optional and outrage was king. I handed the tablet back to Sarah. Get me city engineer Frank Miller on the phone and clear my next hour. Frank was a good man, a straight arrow who'd been with the city for 30 years. He'd seen it all, including 2 decades of my father's work. He answered on the second ring. Frank? I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. I need you to do something for me. Officially. I want a complete, independent structural integrity review of every public works project completed in Oakhaven over the last 25 years. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Every project, Mayor? That's a lot of ground to cover. The Elm Street Bridge, the Northwood Sewer expansion, the old community center. Especially the Elm Street Bridge, I said, my voice hardening. I want a priority review on anything built by Vance Contracting. Hire outside auditors. Spare no expense. Frame it as a new public safety initiative. I want a preliminary report on my desk in 2 weeks. I knew what he would find. Hairline cracks, premature corrosion, sagging supports. A whole portfolio of corners cut, just like the bridge that needed major repairs after 5 years. My father had built his empire on a foundation of good enough rice. I was about to show the town what good enough really cost them. After I hung up with Frank, I buzzed Sarah again. Get me the city council president. This was the second part of the plan. A defensive move wasn't enough. I had to go on the attack, but not in the way they expected. Council President Davis was on the line moments later. Elias, I've been reading the Chronicle. This is a mess. It's about to get a lot clearer, Bob, I said. I'm calling a special press conference for tomorrow morning. Town hall steps. To respond to your father? He asked, his voice laced with concern. Are you sure that's wise? It could look even more personal. It won't be about my father, I countered. It will be about the riverfront. I'm going to announce that, given the immense public interest and the vital importance of this project, the city is officially opening the Oakhaven riverfront development to a public bidding process. Silence. I let the idea sink in. We're going to invite proposals from the best firms in the state, I continued, pressing my advantage. We're going to create a transparent, public review committee. We're going to build the best possible project for Oakhaven, not the fastest or the cheapest. And to ensure absolute fairness, and to remove any hint of impropriety, my own company, Vance & Sons, will be legally barred from submitting a bid. The political genius of it struck Davis immediately. I could hear the shift in his tone from worried to impressed. My God, Elias, you'd take your own company out of the running? That's principled. It's the only way, Bob, I said, though the words felt like stone in my mouth. The project is more important than any one company. It's about the next 100 years of this town. Can I count on your support? You have it, he said, his voice firm. 100%. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. The rage that had been simmering inside me since my family walked in had cooled, hardening into something else. Something solid and unyielding. My father wanted to make this a street fight, a dirty public brawl about family drama. I was refusing to show up. Instead, I was inviting him to a formal duel, on grounds of my choosing, with weapons I had mastered and he had long since abandoned: integrity, transparency, and quality. He wanted to tear the town down to get at me. I was going to build it up to defeat him. The next morning, I stood on the steps of Town Hall. The air was cool, but the media scrum was a hot, buzzing hive of cameras and microphones. A crowd of citizens had gathered on the lawn, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I saw Caleb and my father standing at the back, arms crossed, their expressions radiating smug confidence. They thought they had me. They thought I was here to sling mud, to turn this into the petty family drama they'd already scripted for the town. I stepped to the podium, the city seal a solid weight at my back. I didn't look at my family, I looked at the people of Oakhaven. Yesterday, I began, my voice clear and amplified by the speakers. Allegations were made that my office is acting out of personal bias regarding the riverfront development. Let me be clear, this project is too important for any one person, any one family, or any one company. It's about the next 100 years of Oakhaven. I paused, letting the words land. Therefore, to ensure a project of the highest quality and integrity, I am officially rescinding the initial proposal and opening the Oakhaven riverfront development to a competitive public bidding process. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. The reporters scribbled furiously. A transparent, citizen-led committee will review all submissions, I continued, my voice gaining strength. We will not settle for the cheapest bid. We will not settle for the fastest. We will choose the turns best. And to remove any doubt, to eliminate even the shadow of a conflict of interest, I am announcing today that my own company, Vance & Sons Contracting, will be legally barred from submitting a bid. A stunned silence fell over the square. The reporters looked up from their notepads, their expressions shifting from cynicism to shock. I saw my father's face go slack, the smugness evaporating, replaced by a dawning, horrified disbelief. Caleb's jaw was literally hanging open. I had refused to play their game, so I had changed the board entirely. I had sacrificed my own king to protect the kingdom. The questions that followed were sharp, but I was prepared. By the time I walked back into Town Hall, the narrative had been shattered and rewritten. My father hadn't just lost the battle, he had lost the war for public opinion. The universe, it seems, wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, the storm hit. It wasn't in the forecast. It came out of nowhere, a furious, black-hearted tempest that clawed its way inland from the lake. They called it a 100-year storm. The wind howled like a banshee, and rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. I was in the city's emergency command center, a windowless bunker in the basement of Town Hall. The phones rang off the hook, power lines down, widespread flooding in the low-lying areas. Then the call came in from the chief of police. His voice was grim. "Mayor, it's the Elm Street Bridge. The supports are, it's not looking good. We've got water coming over the deck. It's making a hell of a noise." The Elm Street Bridge, a Vance contracting project, completed 15 years ago, the one I had screamed at my father about across the dining room table. "I'm on my way," I said, grabbing my coat. The scene was pure chaos. Wind and rain lashed at me as I got out of my car. Police cars, lights flashing, formed a barricade. The river, normally a gentle brown ribbon, was a raging, muddy beast, clawing at the bridge's foundations. And the bridge itself, it was groaning, a deep, sickening sound of stressed concrete and twisting steel. A long, dark crack snaked across its deck like a jagged bolt of lightning. And then I saw them. Across the police line, huddled under a single, inadequate umbrella, stood my father, Caleb and Maria. They were staring at the bridge, their faces pale masks of horror in the flashing emergency lights. Their monument to thrift, their legacy of good enough, was literally crumbling before the entire town's eyes. My father turned his head, and his eyes met mine across the rain-swept asphalt. There was no anger left in them. No pride, only the hollow, vacant look of a man watching his entire world wash away. Caleb looked like he was going to be sick. But it was Maria who broke me. She looked from the failing bridge to my face, and her eyes were filled with a terrible, absolute clarity. She finally understood. Frank Miller, my city engineer, ran up to me, his face drenched. "It's going, Mayor. The rebar is corroding from the inside out. The cheap mix couldn't take the pressure. It's a miracle it's held this long." My father's shoddy work, his greed, was being laid bare by an act of God. It wasn't my revenge. It was natural justice. I turned to the police chief, my voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "Clear a 2-block radius, now." I gave the order, but it was too late. The groan of stressed metal became a high-pitched, tearing shriek. With a deafening boom that vibrated through my bones, the center span of the Elm Street Bridge surrendered. Concrete and twisted steel, the very guts of my father's reputation, plunged into the raging river. A collective gasp went through the crowd of onlookers. They weren't just watching a bridge collapse. They were watching the undeniable truth being laid bare in the most spectacular way imaginable. My father's smear campaign had just been washed away in the flood. I didn't look at my family. I didn't have to. I could feel the weight of their humiliation radiating across the rain-swept street. My focus was on the job. "Get rescue teams downstream." I barked at the police chief, my voice cutting through the storm. "We need to track that debris field. Set up an emergency shelter at the high school gym." I was the mayor. This was my town. My personal vindication was a luxury I couldn't afford. But as I turned, I saw Caleb stumble away, his face ashen, looking like a man who'd been punched in the soul. My father stood frozen, a statue of ruin, watching his legacy sink into the murky depths. He looked ancient. Then, Maria moved. She took a hesitant step toward me, crossing the invisible barrier between us. Rain and tears mixed on her face, but her eyes were clear. "Elias," she choked out, the name a foreign sound on her lips after a decade of silence. "Mom's house. It's just past the bend. It's in the floodplain." The words struck me harder than the storm. Mom's house. The one place I still held sacred. The home they'd let fall into disrepair, but it was still hers. Still a part of me. For a single, fleeting moment, the mayor vanished. I was just her son. I looked at my sister, and for the first time, I didn't see the silent accomplice to my exile. I saw the terrified girl I grew up with. I grabbed Frank Miller's arm. "Frank, get a crew, your best people, go to 214 Willow Creek Lane. Now, I want that property sandbagged. Do whatever it takes to protect it." He nodded, already shouting into his radio. I turned back to Maria. Her eyes were wide, glistening with a fragile, disbelieving hope. The moral victory wasn't in the thunderous collapse of a bridge. It was in the quiet choice to save the last piece of a home. Is it morally wrong to use my position to get a little revenge on my family? Or is this exactly what they deserve? I really want to know your take on this.